What if the house your parents live in, the one they flaunt as their own, has secretly been yours all along? Meet Rachel Monroe, a successful woman betrayed by the very people she tried to save. After overhearing one brutal conversation, she stops playing the good daughter and starts taking back control. This isn't revenge, it's justice. Subscribe now for powerful, real-life inspired stories about self-worth, quiet strength, and walking away when love turns toxic. I wasn't supposed to hear it. It was a regular Thursday morning, and I was sitting at my desk in my downtown Atlanta apartment, staring blankly at a spreadsheet on my laptop. The same one I'd been updating for hours. My coffee had gone cold. Then my phone rang. Dad. That word used to mean something warm and steady. Now it felt like a formality. I picked up. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to sound pleasant. There was no answer at first, just the sound of a chair scraping and some rustling. I was about to hang up when I heard his voice, tired and sharp. "She's a failure. Rachel's never going to amount to anything." My stomach twisted. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then came my mother's voice, lower, but no less cruel. "Oh, come on, Tom. She's doing fine. At least she pays the mortgage," he scoffed. "That's the bare minimum, after everything we've done for her. I've never been proud of her. She was a mistake. Always has been. She thinks she's successful, but she's just a joke. A mistake, a joke." The words hit like knives, precise and familiar, cutting straight through me. I felt my throat go dry, my hand tightening around the phone. I wanted to hang up, scream, anything. But I was frozen. Then came the final blow. "She's lucky we even let her be part of this family." A beat passed, and then the call ended. He hadn't meant to call me. He had forgotten to hang up. I sat there in silence, the ringing in my ears louder than the phone. My chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. For 6 years, I had quietly paid their mortgage. They thought they were paying the bank. They didn't know I had stepped in when they were drowning, that I had bought the mortgage through my company, JSC Equity Holdings, and kept them afloat without ever asking for credit. They never read the fine print. They had no idea they'd been living under my name, my roof. But now I knew the truth. They never would have cared. And I was done pretending it didn't matter. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, while my father's words echoed through my head like a broken loop. She was a mistake, a jokey. Never going to succeed. It wasn't just what he said. It was how certain he sounded. Like my entire life was a footnote to his disappointment. You'd think after all these years I'd be used to it. My father never handed out praise. Not when I graduated top of my class. Not when I landed a 6-figure job straight out of college. Not even when I bought my first home in Buckhead with cash. A perfect GPA expected. Promotions, bare minimum. Buying property in my 30s, waste of money. Every time I thought I'd finally done enough to change how he saw me, he moved the goalpost. But something cracked after that call. The hope I'd clung to, that one day he'd see me and be proud, shattered. And as the sun rose, something else settled in its place: clarity. I got up, made a cup of black coffee, and sat down at my desk. The glow from my laptop screen was harsh in the early morning light. I opened the folder labeled JSC Equity Holdings Property Fay 12, my parents' house. The same house they almost lost 6 years ago, when they were behind on payments and drowning in debt. My mother had called me crying, but my father refused to say a word. Too proud to beg. Too ashamed to admit failure. But I had stepped in. I'd contacted Chris, my financial advisor, and together we structured the perfect deal. I created a shell company, JSC Equity Holdings, then quietly purchased the mortgage from the bank. I didn't tell them. I didn't need to. They thought they were paying the bank, but their checks had been going to my LLC this whole time. And I wasn't just collecting payments, I was covering most of it, nearly $60,000 a month for 6 years. Never once did I ask for thanks. But I had expected one thing: basic respect. Now, I didn't even want that. I wanted justice. quiet, thorough, and legal. As I scrolled through the documents, I found what I was looking for, the clause Chris had insisted we include. At the time, I thought it was unnecessary. He called it a purchase option clause, a safeguard in case things went south. Back then, I laughed. What could go wrong? I was just trying to keep my parents from losing their home. But now, that clause was my out. If the borrower, technically my parents, missed a single payment, JSC Equity Holdings would immediately assume full ownership of the property. No delays, no second chances. And once that happened, they would be reduced to month-to-month tenants. If they couldn't pay rent, I had full legal rights to evict them under Georgia law. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of it all wash over me. My father thought I was a failure, that I was some pathetic woman playing at success. But the man who called me a mistake had been living under my name, under my terms, for 6 years. And now I had the legal leverage to take it all back. I wasn't rushing into it, though. I wasn't driven by rage. I was driven by truth. This wasn't about revenge. It was about cutting ties to a toxic past and reclaiming control over my life. Just then, my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "Hey, sweetheart. Can you come by for dinner this Sunday? We'd love to see you." The last time I was invited for dinner, they asked for money before dessert. I almost didn't reply, but something told me to play along. If they wanted to pretend this was just a loving family get-together, I could pretend too. So I typed back, of course. Looking forward to it. I sent one more text before shutting my laptop for the night. To Uncle David, my dad's older brother, and the only relative who'd ever treated me with kindness. "Hey, have you ever heard Dad say anything about me? Anything I should know?" His response came within seconds. "Rachel, we need to talk. It's worse than you think." My chest tightened as I read Uncle David's message. "It's worse than you think." A moment later, my phone rang. I didn't hesitate. I picked up on the first ring. "Uncle David," I asked. His voice was heavy, hesitant. "Rachel, I've kept quiet for too long. But after what I overheard last week, I can't anymore. I thought your dad was just being prideful. But this is something else." I braced myself. "What did he say?" There was a pause, then he exhaled hard. "They're not just talking about you behind your back. They've been planning something. Thomas, your father, thinks you're hiding money from them. He's been digging around, trying to figure out how much you really have. And last week, I heard him tell your mother that if you don't start handing over more money, they'll find a way to force your hand." The room seemed to tilt. "Force my hand how?" I whispered. "He mentioned calling your employer." David said, his voice dropping lower. "Said something about trying to get you fired. Maybe even reporting you to the IRS, claiming tax fraud. He wants to scare you into giving them more." A cold, sharp heat bloomed in my stomach. This wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated, strategic cruelty. They weren't just ungrateful for the sacrifices I'd made. They were actively scheming to destroy me if I didn't keep paying. I took a long, steadying breath. "I need proof," I said quietly. "Can you get me something? Recordings, texts, anything that backs this up?" "I'll do my best," Uncle David said. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I should have said something sooner." I hung up, numb but focused. My whole life, they'd seen my kindness as weakness. But they were about to learn how wrong they were. I'd tried love. I'd tried silence. Now I was done playing daughter. The next few days, I wouldn't react, I would prepare. And the moment they slipped, the moment they defaulted, I'd be ready. I spent the next 2 days preparing. If my father wanted to play dirty, I would show him just how dangerous it was to underestimate me. I called Chris, my financial advisor. "Rachel." He greeted warmly. "I take it this isn't a social call." "Not exactly," I said, tapping my pen against the desk. "I need to know how fast we can act on the property clause. If they miss a payment, how quickly can I take back full ownership?" He didn't even pause. Immediately. The clause gives JFC Equity Holdings full ownership the moment they default. The only way they could fight it is if they can come up with $350,000 to buy it outright. And we both know they can't. I exhaled. Good. Then I need you to monitor their account. If they're low on funds, I want to know the second it bounces. Chris chuckled. Already checked. Unless they magically find 500 by the 15th. They're toast? I glanced at the calendar. 4 days. 4 days until my parents realized they'd been living under my name all along. That Sunday, I drove to their house as if nothing had changed. The same brick colonial I grew up in, sitting pretty on a quiet tree-lined street in the suburbs. They had no idea it was mine. Not metaphorically, legally. As I pulled into the driveway, my mother appeared at the door, smiling too widely. "Rachel, sweetheart. Come in." The smell of garlic and roast chicken hit me as I stepped inside. My father sat at the head of the table, arms crossed. My brother Brandon lounged nearby, smirking, as if the world owed him something just for existing. Unlike me, Brandon never had to earn anything. He was their golden boy, the default favorite despite doing absolutely nothing of value. I sat down, my face neutral. "It's good to see you, Rachel," my father said with the stiffness of someone swallowing pride. "You too," I replied, cool and controlled. The meal began, but the room was thick with unspoken agendas. I didn't have to wait long for the real reason they'd asked me over. My mother set down a bowl of roasted potatoes and gave me a sweet, rehearsed smile. "We've been thinking a lot about family lately," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "And how important it is to support each other during hard times." I said nothing. Just let her keep going. "The truth is, Rachel." My father finally spoke, his tone strained. "We're struggling a bit. The mortgage is tight this month." I tilted my head slightly. "How much do you need?" I asked, feigning concern. "We were thinking maybe an extra $3,000 a month." My mother chimed in quickly, like they'd rehearsed this line. "Just for a few months until things stabilize." I nearly laughed. For years, I'd been quietly paying $5,800 a month to keep this house afloat, and now they were asking for more, on top of that. I set my fork down carefully. "That's a lot of money." My father leaned forward, his voice sharpening. "It's nothing compared to what we've done for you. We raised you, gave you everything. The least you can do is support your family when we need you." I held his gaze, my stomach cold. The least I could do. This, from the man who'd called me a mistake, a joke, while living under my generosity. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip of water. "I'll think about it," I said finally. My mother let out a breath of relief. "Oh, sweetheart, thank you. We knew we could count on you." I smiled thinly, hiding the truth behind my teeth. They had no idea that in just 3 days, they would lose everything. That night, back in my apartment, I received a call from Chris. I picked up immediately. "They defaulted," he said. 2 words. That was all I needed. "Are you sure?" I asked, though I already knew. "Absolutely." The funds weren't there. As of midnight tonight, JSC Equity Holdings owns the house outright. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. It was done. The man who once mocked me now lived in a house that was no longer his. "Do you want me to initiate the eviction process?" Chris asked. I paused, considering it. "Not yet," I said, a slow smile forming. "I want to see how long it takes them to figure it out on their own." There was something poetic about it. The people who always saw me as incapable, weak, insignificant, had no idea they were living on borrowed time, in a house owned by the daughter they dismissed. I leaned back, staring at a framed family photo on my shelf, one from years ago when I still believed my father was capable of love. Not anymore. 3 days passed. Nothing. No calls, no messages. Just silence. I knew they hadn't realized it yet. They still believed they were in control, still thought their mortgage had been paid. They had no clue the property they bragged about, the one they treated like a symbol of their success, now belonged to me. I didn't expect guilt. I didn't expect apologies. I expected exactly what I got, entitlement. It was only a matter of time. At exactly 9:07 a.m. on Friday morning, the email hit my inbox. Subject: Your Gen Default Notice Property Fin 12. It was from the JSC Holdings Legal Department. I opened it slowly, feeling a quiet satisfaction build in my chest. The tone was cold, professional, and final. Due to non-payment of the agreed upon mortgage by the deadline of the 15th, JSC Equity Holdings had executed the purchase option clause. The company, me, was now the sole legal owner of the property located on Meadowridge Lane. My parents would be considered month-to-month tenants from this point forward. If rent wasn't paid, eviction proceedings would begin. At 9:42 a.m., my phone rang. Mom. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:47, she called again. Then, at 9:50, it was my father. I let them sweat for a full hour before picking up. When I finally answered, her voice was frantic. Rachel, there's been some kind of mistake. We just got a notice from the bank saying we defaulted on the mortgage, but that's impossible. Can you help us? I smiled. It's not a mistake. There was silence on the line. What do you mean it's not a mistake? My mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment hang before answering. I mean exactly what I said. You missed your payment. The house isn't yours anymore. Another pause. Then nervous laughter. Rachel, that's not how this works. We've been paying the mortgage for years. We've never missed one. There's got to be some kind of error with the bank. I didn't flinch. You weren't paying the bank, I said calmly. You were paying me? Dead silence. Then, in a sharp tone I knew too well, my father cut in. You're lying. I sighed. I'm not. 6 years ago, when you were about to lose the house, I bought the mortgage. You didn't read the fine print. The checks you've been sending, they've been going to JSC Equity Holdings. That's my company. I own this house. I always have. I could hear my mother's breath hitch. My father muttered a string of curses under his breath, and then Brandon, who had apparently been listening in, scoffed. So what? We've been paying rent to our own failure of a sister, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. That explains the mess. You probably screwed up the paperwork like you screw up everything else. I clenched my jaw but didn't let him see me flinch. Well, Brandon, I replied evenly, since I screw everything up, you'll be thrilled to know rent is now due in 30 days. If you can't pay, you'll be evicted. Wait. My mother started, her tone desperate, but my father cut her off. This is a bluff. You wouldn't do this to your own family. I gave a short laugh. Wouldn't I? I thought of every unkind word, every manipulation, every attempt to control me through guilt. I've already talked to my lawyer. Miss another payment, refuse rent, damage anything. You're out. And if you try to retaliate, I'll press charges. I hung up before my father could speak again. Then I blocked all three of them. I sat in silence for a moment, staring at my phone. The blocked numbers left a strange emptiness on the screen. No more calls, no more messages, just quiet. For years, I had bent over backward trying to keep the peace, trying to earn love from people who only saw me as a source of money and control. But not anymore. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next few days were eerily quiet. I half expected my mother to show up at my door with tears and apologies. I imagined my father calling with threats or my brother trying to twist things into a victim narrative. But nothing came. No voicemails. No texts. Just silence. I knew what it meant. They hadn't accepted what happened. They were regrouping, planning their next move. It came on Wednesday morning, just after I'd finished my first coffee at work. My phone buzzed with a call from an unfamiliar number. I let it ring out, then ignored the next one. Moments later, an email popped up in my inbox. Subject line URGN Foreclosure Dispute Monroe Residence. It was from a law office. I opened it. Dear Ms. Monroe. We have been contacted by Thomas and Diane Monroe regarding the recent foreclosure and transfer of ownership of their property. They believe there has been a misunderstanding and would like to discuss the potential reinstatement of ownership. Please contact our office to avoid legal escalation. I read the email twice. Then I forwarded it to Chris with a brief note thoughts. Less than 10 minutes later, Chris called, laughing. They don't have a case. They signed everything, mortgage, payment schedule, purchase clause. It's airtight. There's no legal pathway for them to reverse this. I figured. I said, exhaling slowly. But they won't stop, will they? Nope, Chris replied. They'll keep pushing. But they're out of moves. Unless they're desperate enough to go nuclear. I didn't say anything. But I knew that's exactly what my father was capable of. And I wasn't going to wait around to be blindsided. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was coming. My father wouldn't go down quietly. If he couldn't win legally, he'd go for the jugular, my career. And that meant I had to act first. The next morning, I walked into the HR office at my firm, calm on the outside but bracing for impact on the inside. My manager, Lauren, looked up from her desk and smiled. Rachel, everything okay? I need to talk to you about something important. In private, I said. She immediately stood and ushered me into her office, closing the door behind us. I took a deep breath and sat across from her. My parents. They've been trying to manipulate me financially for years. And now that I've cut them off, I believe my father's planning to come after my job. I saw the surprise on her face, but I didn't stop. His mentioned calling HR, filing false complaints, maybe even trying to frame me for fraud or tax issues. I wanted to give you a heads up before anything happened. Lauren leaned forward, serious now. Rachel, thank you for telling me. First of all, let me be clear. You are not going anywhere. We deal with these kinds of situations more often than you'd think. Ex-spouses, disgruntled parents, even siblings. Our legal team will be notified, and if your father makes any contact, we'll document everything. He won't be able to touch your position here. Relief washed over me like a wave. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been gripping my anxiety until I finally let it out. Thank you, I said, voice soft. Lauren gave me a reassuring smile. You're smart to be proactive. And don't worry. He's the one who's going to regret this. I left the office feeling stronger, steadier. My father had already lost the house. Now, I'd made sure he wouldn't take my livelihood too. He thought I was vulnerable, an easy target. But the truth was, I'd learned how to fight smarter. He could try whatever he wanted. I was ready for him now. That night, just as I was finishing dinner, there was a knock at my door. Sharp, urgent, angry. I already knew who it was before I even opened it. I pulled the door open and there they were, my parents, standing together on the front step like some final act in a play they refused to let end. My father's face was red, his jaw tight with restrained fury. My mother's eyes were swollen, like she'd been crying for hours. She whispered, Rachel, please. I crossed my arms and stood in the doorway, blocking their path. What do you want? We need the house back? My father said, his tone clipped and demanding. You have no right to do this to us. I didn't move. I have every right. Legally? Financially? Morally? We raised you. My mother pleaded. We gave you everything. And now you're punishing us. For what? I stared at her. For calling me a failure behind my back. For saying I was a mistake. For plotting to ruin my career when I stopped giving you money. That's not punishment. That's me setting boundaries. She flinched. My father stepped forward, his voice growing cold. You're being cruel? I laughed once. Short and sharp. No, Dad. I'm being fair. I supported you in silence for 6 years. I paid your mortgage. I kept you from losing everything. And all I asked for was respect. You couldn't even give me that. A heavy silence fell between us. My father's gaze hardened. You'll regret this, he growled. You think you're winning, but you're not. You'll never be anything without us. One day, you'll realize that. And in that moment, something inside me broke free. The last thread of hope that he could ever see me, ever value me, finally snapped. I met his glare with calm steel. Then I guess we'll see, won't we? Without another word, I shut the door in their faces. I stood there for a long moment, hands still on the knob, heart pounding, not from fear, but from something new. Freedom. The next morning I woke early, calm in a way I hadn't felt in years. I brewed a cup of coffee, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop. This wasn't revenge. This was closure. I logged into the JSC Equity Holdings portal and began typing the final document. Subject notice to vacate property N12 from JSC Equity Holdings. Legal Department to Thomas and Diane Monroe. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Monroe, as previously stated in our default notification dated the 15th, the mortgage agreement on the property located at 38 Fontaine Meadowridge Lane is no longer in effect due to non-payment. Effective immediately, your tenancy is terminated. You are required to vacate the premises within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in formal eviction proceedings under Georgia law. Please ensure all personal belongings are removed before the deadline to avoid legal complications. Sincerely, Rachel Monroe, owner. JSC Equity Holdings. I reviewed the notice once more, then hit send. The moment the email left my outbox, I felt the weight finally lift. No more waiting. No more hoping. They had 30 days to leave the home they'd treated like a trophy, a symbol of their superiority. Never knowing the only reason they still had it was because of me. By noon, the backlash began. My mother called 27 times. I didn't answer. My father left one voicemail. You'll regret this one day. You'll come crawling back. And when you do, we won't be here. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. There was nothing left for me in his voice. No guilt, no recognition, just anger at losing control. Brandon sent a single text. Congrats, Rachel. You just ruined our family. Hope you're happy. I didn't bother replying. There was nothing left to salvage. They had spent years making me feel like I was the problem, like I was unworthy of love unless I paid for it. Now, they were the ones without a home. And for the first time in my life, I was free. 30 days passed, and I didn't drive by the house. I didn't check in. I didn't send a message or wonder if they needed anything. I didn't need to. Mark handled the logistics. He confirmed that they moved out the day before the deadline. No fuss, no public scene. My guess. They left quietly to avoid the shame of being officially evicted. They packed up what they wanted, dumped the rest into trash bags, and walked away from the home I had kept afloat for 6 years. A few days later, I drove out there one last time. I didn't park in the driveway. I pulled up to the curb and just sat for a moment. The house looked different, smaller somehow. The yard was overgrown, the porch light bulb burnt out. The red door, once pristine under my mother's meticulous cleaning routine, was faded and chipped. I walked up the steps and turned the knob. My key still worked. Inside, it smelled like dust and lemon cleaner, like a memory half erased. The living room was empty, except for a few boxes of junk they'd left behind. The kitchen felt hollow. No passive-aggressive remarks, no tension between dishes. Just silence. And peace. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But all I felt was release. Years of guilt, obligation, and silent desperation drained out of me like water through a cracked glass. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was done. 2 weeks later, I sold the house. The market was hot, and it went in days. The profit was generous. More than enough to make a new beginning. But instead of spending it on a vacation or a new place of my own, I did something different. I started a fund for young women trying to escape financially abusive homes. Women like me. Girls who were told they were burdens just for existing. Who had to buy their place in their own families. I wanted them to know they weren't alone. That they had options. That they could survive and thrive. Because I'd learned something the hard way: family isn't who shares your DNA. Family is who stands by you when you have nothing left. And sometimes, that person is yourself. 3 months passed. Life got quiet, in the best way possible. I worked, I traveled a little, I expanded the fund. I even spoke at a small financial literacy seminar for young women looking to break away from toxic households. It felt like healing, slow, grounded, and completely mine. Then, one evening as I was settling in with a book and glass of wine, I heard the familiar ping of an email notification. I almost ignored it, but the subject line caught my eye from Mom. I stared at it for a long time before clicking. From Diane Monroe, subject, please message Rachel, please. I don't know where else to go. Can we talk? Just talk, Keys. That was it. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a request that assumed access. Assumed I still owed her something. A few months ago, that message would have broken me. I would have cried, questioned myself, debated whether I was being too harsh, too cold, too much. But now, I just sat back in my chair, calm and clear. I didn't need to open that wound again. I didn't need to explain or defend the boundaries I'd set. I didn't owe them a response. Not after everything they had taken from me emotionally, financially, spiritually. Some people burn bridges. Others rebuild them over and over, no matter how many times they collapse. But me? I finally understood that some bridges deserve to stay burned. Without hesitation, I hovered over the email and clicked delete. No second thoughts. No guilt. It was never really about the house, or the money, or even the lies. It was about finally choosing myself. About learning that love isn't supposed to come with conditions. That your value doesn't decrease because someone else fails to see it. That day, as the sun dipped beyond the skyline, I stood up from my desk, took a deep breath, and let the quiet in. I hadn't just closed a chapter. I had ended the book. And this time, I was the one writing the next one. On my terms. Sometimes the people we fight hardest to impress are the ones least capable of seeing our worth. But here's the truth. You don't need to earn love by suffering. Your value isn't defined by who accepts or rejects you. It's defined by how you show up for yourself when no one else does. Let go of those who only love you when you're useful. Choose peace over approval. Choose you. Have you ever had to walk away to find peace? Share your story in the comments. And if this touched your heart, hit subscribe. We grow stronger together.